Welcome to the sixth program in the Cross-Border Currents series, which consists of conversations exploring artists and their work through cultural events, collaborations, and exchanges between Canada and the United States. This series is an initiative of the Council for Canadian-American Relations, CCAR, in partnership with the National Arts Club. I'm Catherine Johnson, a volunteer member of the Photo Committee at the club. For those not familiar with the National Arts Club, we're a nonprofit organization based in New York City with a mission to promote public interest in the arts. We offer over 150 free public programs annually. You can learn more about the NAC on our website, nacnyc.org, or please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. CCAR fosters cross-border friendship and impact through arts programs and collaborations. Visit ccar-nyc.org or follow the council on Instagram. Today's discussion features a conversation between Canadian photographer Edward Burtynsky and David Campany, the creative director of the International Center for Photography in New York City. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome, Edward Burtynsky and David Campany. Thank you for joining us to discuss Edward's first exhibition in New York City in 20 years. It's entitled The Great Acceleration, and it will be held at the International Center of Photography. This exhibition explores humanity's impact and assault on our natural landscapes. It opens June 19th and extends through September 28th. The last week of the exhibit coincides with Climate Week. By way of introduction, Edward Burtynsky is a Canadian photographer of Ukrainian heritage who has spent the last 40 years documenting the impact of industry on the planet. His work is included in the collections of more than 80 museums, including MoMA, the Guggenheim, the Tate Modern, and the Reina Sofia in Madrid. David Campany is currently the creative director at the International Center of Photography in New York. He holds a PhD and has taught photography theory and practice at all academic levels. David has had a profound and wide-ranging influence on the field of photography through his roles as writer, curator, educator, and editor. I encourage you to visit both of their websites for more information on their incredible careers and body of work.
We're going to start the discussion by sharing from some of the 70 images that are included in your exhibition. Edward, for the last 20 years, you must have been deeply focused on creating and photographing during this time. Could you share some background on these images and what was involved in securing these industrial sites, the pre-planning and the negotiation to access and to photograph them?
So essentially, a lot of the areas where I photographed, like in this photograph, for instance, is in Sudbury. And at that time, the land was owned by Inco, which is a big nickel producer in Canada that then was purchased by Vale, which is a big national Brazilian mining company and now is run by Vale. But in most cases, to get access to these kinds of landscapes, they're very sensitive. And usually I had to be in discussion at the CEO level, which in this case I was. And in most cases, I'm having to work at CEO level because nobody lower down the chain is willing to risk something like this, especially in a tailings where, generally speaking, the story is a challenging one because it's not that these things are a secret or a dirty secret. Every mine, to be a mine, needs to have tailings. You can't put the material back in the hole you're digging. So you have to put it somewhere, and that's what tailings is. And you have dry tailings, which is stuff that doesn't have any value at all because you're getting to the good stuff. And then you have the stuff that is actually the ore, where you're actually extracting copper or nickel. In this case, it's both copper and nickel. And once you've extracted the copper and nickel, those are wet tailings. And what we're looking at in this image is wet tailings. And even at the time when I got there, the management at the mine thought that management in Toronto had lost their minds by letting me go there and photograph. And they were trying to stop me even when I got there. I had an editor of Canadian Art Magazine with me, Rick Rhodes, and we were in the waiting room, and I could hear the manager screaming, at the whoever in the board or in Toronto about why we're letting this photographer go to the tailings and photograph it. So these things are challenging. But I've always been careful, and I always position my work as a kind of a revelatory, not accusatory body of work. I'm trying to show, in a way, the world what the counterpart to our existence, to a consumer society, to all the materials that we engage with every day. And oftentimes people say, well, are you aestheticizing disaster? And I'm saying, well, let's discuss, what is disaster? You wake up in the morning, you turn off your alarm clock that's plugged into electricity, which is, generated by a nuclear power plant and sent over by copper. And then you end up, going to brush your teeth, and you turn on your water, and it's gone through all kinds of, filter systems and copper pipes and lead pipes or whatever pipes, plastic pipes to get to you. And your faucet is actually stainless steel. All these things are materials. We're engaged with them from the minute we get up in the morning till when we go to bed. Your car, your light switch, everything is connected. So basically, what I'm showing is that to support 8 billion people on the planet, the scale of the taking is commensurate to the size of our metropolises. So it really is just the yin to the yang. I'm kind of bringing you into a world that you partake of, but really don't have an opportunity to actually experience, because there's no reason for them to let you there. It's an industrial site, and there's no reason to get there. They're usually very hard to get to in the middle of nowhere. So there'd be no reason for somebody living in the city to go and see these places.
Right. And so what criteria do you use to find these and select these locations?
Usually very simple. I was just, if I'm looking for nickel or if I'm looking for copper, I just look for the biggest examples on the planet. And then I go to the CEO and I say, the reason why I'm talking to you, Mr. CEO, is that, you have the biggest copper mine in the world, and I am interested in showing scale. And, if you don't let me in, I'll go and talk to the second biggest or the third biggest or whatever. Somebody's going to let me in, but I'd rather you let me in because you're the biggest.
Well, it's a very methodical process. And David, also feel free to chime in as we're speaking about these photographs also.
Sure. I was just great to be here, by the way. Thank you very much for the invitation. Ed, your works are arriving at the gallery as we speak.
Oh, good. The truck made it. Yay.
I made it. It's all here. Very exciting. Well, our galleries are prepared and ready for the framed prints. It's interesting, Ed, talking about the work in terms of revelation rather than accusation. I often think the most powerful pictures are the ones that don't pass judgment, actually, that bounce back the question of, response, not just a sort of aesthetic response, but some kind of moral or ethical response onto the viewer. We tend to think of work that is socially or politically engaged, as having a very direct message, usually an accusatory one. And there's a place for that kind of work. But what's always interested me about Ed's work is actually the suspension of judgment. That's not to say Ed doesn't have his own opinion about these things, but actually the work is much more effective in simply using what photography does best, which is to show things, often in great detail. And I'm sure Ed can talk about the relation between his pictures in detail better than I can. And it's that suspension that allows the pictures to have this, not necessarily ambiguous, but certainly a kind of open invitation to think and respond, not necessarily to be told something. And we've called the show The Great Acceleration. This is a scientific term that's used to gather up a number of measures, 24 measures of human impact on the planet, all of which have been accelerating since the Industrial Revolution, but exponentially so since the end of the First World War. and Ed's been making work for 4 decades or more within and around so many of these measures, whether it's looking at oil production or water usage or population movement or temperature rises or the extent of manufacturing, recycling, all of these things. And so there was a chance to do an exhibition that actually brought work from many of Ed's different bodies of work in different parts of the world with different themes and put them into relation to each other, not just visually, but in terms of all of these different kinds of impacts that we're having on the planet. And it's interesting that the period in which Ed has been making this work is really the period of increased awareness, planetary awareness about exactly what we're doing. I think of Ed's pictures as sort of being this taken of the kind of stage wings of modernity. Everyone likes the good, shiny part, but as Ed said, if you want running water, you've got pipes and you've got plastic and steel and all the rest of it. If you've got clothes, they're made somewhere, and it's not often we get a chance to see those things.
Can we move on to the next slide? Also, we have 6 images that we like to share, and some of your comments are also so relevant to the other images we selected.
One of my favorites. Ed, tell us about this one.
Well, it has this kind of monumentality to this image. It was interesting. This shoot precipitated, and oftentimes my shoots will precipitate out of something I see or hear or read. In this case, it's something I heard on our national radio program, CBC. There's a program called Ideas. I actually tried to find it in the archives. I never could find it, but I do recall that it was something that I was driving, listening to, and I sat up and I went, this is really interesting. But it was the consequences of the Exxon Valdez oil spill that got me here. And what happened was that the insurance company, there was somebody from an insurance company that insured big oil tankers. And the Exxon Valdez, if you recall the accident, it was terrible. It was like 1,000 pristine miles of shore along the Alaska coast and to BC a bit. And it was like a thick crude oil. And what happened is that the captain had been found to be drinking and went off course and ran this single-hulled oil tanker onto a rock, which split open the side of the tanker, spilled out thousands and thousands, if not millions of gallons of oil. And then it just coated that whole coastline. And it was considered at that time the biggest and worst oil disaster in history. And when the insurance representative was on the program talking, he said, we can't insure for human error. And especially if somebody's got a substance problem or a mental problem, and that they're actually in charge of something on the scale of an oil tanker, which is the largest vessel ever built by humans. That's the biggest thing we've ever built as an oil tanker, as that moves in the world as a singular vessel. And they said that they weren't going to insure ships that are single-hulled after 2004. I think that got extended further, but a double-hulled ship would have prevented that problem. The first outer shell of the tanker would have been pierced, but the middle might have been dented, but it wouldn't be pierced, and therefore it would have prevented an accident like that. But the thing that was interesting is that, but one of the consequences is that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of single-hulled ships out there traversing the sea, probably not thousands, but hundreds for sure. And they're not insurable. So there'll be a plethora of these ships to be broken, that they have to go somewhere to be dismantled. And to me, that was the idea. Where are these things being dismantled? Because that, I thought, would be a subject to photograph that I'd love. The biggest things we as humans have ever built being taken apart. And so that was my impetus to start researching. And then I found my way to my research to Alang, which is in the Gujarat state in India where the most of these ships, they were breaking about 200 to 300 ships a year. So it was like this massive operation on the shorelines in India. And I tried to get access there, but right at that time, Greenpeace went in there and did a sting operation on them with cameras saying that they were a documentary crew from Germany following the ship's life. But what they were doing is gathering evidence that this was the most dangerous work and the most polluted kind of work that you can imagine. So they said, anybody with a camera is a persona non grata. I couldn't get in. So then I asked the question, where's the next biggest place where they break ships? And that was in Chittagong, Bangladesh. And they were doing about 50 a year there. But it was the most rudimentary, way of breaking a ship. The most sophisticated tool that they had was a cutting torch. That's it. And then the rest of it was stuff that they salvaged off the ships, like, all the motors and things for the, drawing up the anchors were then used to pull in the bits of the ship from the shore, from out to shore. So at high tide, so once a month they get a high tide. And so once a month they run these ships at full speed from about 15 kilometers offshore. And then they just ram them up on this beach at high tide and see how far they can get them up. And then from there, they start to break them. So you can see the two ships flanking this central one was where they stopped in the tide. That's where they got stuck in the mud.
I think anyone who's ever seen these never forgets them, ever. So very powerful. What are the sizes of most of these prints in the show?
A lot of them are 60 by 80 and 48 inches by 64 inches and 60 by 80 inches, and some smaller ones too.
Yeah.
This absolutely burns in your brain. So even at this small size on a screen. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the prints large.
The size is a really interesting question because, you can make a photograph any size you like. It's in the nature of photography, right? That there's capture and then there's output. That's not the same with a painter who paints the painting at the size that it is. So often, I think when audiences are looking at photographs, that they are thinking, oh, what's going on with this image at this scale? And the interesting thing with Ed's work is, yes, they are very beautifully, very classically composed, and they are incredibly striking when you first see them. But there's two other aspects that are really important to me as a curator of an exhibition experience. One is what happens when you walk close to the picture and you sort of forget its composition somehow, and you're more interested in, the details, the human details, the industrial details, the information, if you like. That's important. But I think what is also there is that if you have a very large photograph, many people can see it at the same time. I think there's a very interesting social dimension to that. It's a bit like, if you think about the difference between when you go see a movie in a cinema, there's a sort of, you have your own experience, but there's a sort of a collective consciousness. You're not quite accountable to each other, but you kind of are, in a way. You're all seeing something at the same time in the same place. And I think that there's a really interesting social potential in that. And that can only happen, historically, photographic art was very small. It was very small pictures, 8 by 10, 10 by 12. And it was a very private experience. You go up to this small little thing on the wall and you look through the kind of plate glass at it, very individualized. But the subject of Ed's work is social, and the experience of the work, I think, is also social. Most of the images are 80 inches wide, although we do have some high-res, very large vinyl prints. One of them is 30-foot square, which I imagine is going to be the largest photograph New York has seen for a while. That'll be going up very...
I love thinking and talking about this as a film lover who is at AFC and Film Forum every weekend.
Right.
I also love when younger people that I work with, they say, well, why should I go to a museum to see a photograph? And I think that's just a really interesting discussion, because I am a firm believer of seeing the work in the experience of in a museum. Can you also speak a little to that, David? I think you did.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about photographs is on some level they kind of belong everywhere you see them. You know, Ed makes beautiful books, and when you see the page of a book, it's kind of belongs there. But we also see images on billboards and on screens and on social media. So my feeling as a curator of a real, architectural space and exhibition space is I have to make a show that people will want to visit. And that means they have an experience that they can't have on their screens, and they can't have in the form of a book or a magazine page or a billboard. So when people do come, there is an extraordinary experience to be had, and it's to do with these images at scale and their relation to each other and how it unfolds as you move through the space. I know I'm speaking like a tracking shot now.
Well, no, that's okay. We can also share a next image to make a further discussion.
Yeah, it's important, I think. Oh, this is interesting. This picture. I persuaded Ed to let me show portraits, which he doesn't show very often, but he often makes. And then suddenly, these photographs are. I mean, there are lots of people in Ed's pictures, but most of the time you think of them as sort of figures in a landscape or figures, maybe within a factory. But Ed can't make his work without talking to dozens and dozens of people along the way. And I thought it would be a really interesting counterpoint to have. I think we have around 20 of these, much more individual.
Yeah, we have a few also. We have some of the factory images also.
Yeah.
So can we share Ed, do you have any comments about this particular image? I know it looks very toxic to me, the pile behind her.
Well, yeah, this one was interesting because I saw she was in her 90s. I think she was in her mid 90s. So she had seen, from imperialist China, and then lived through Mao, and then watched what happened with the kind of embrace of capitalism in a kind of communist way that, central controlled capitalism basically is what I believe, China entered, with one prevailing party. And, and this is kind of almost this outfit is in a Maoist kind of tradition as well. But, and now, I'm seeing her, and this is in, I think, 2002 or 3, I think it was 2003 when I photographed this, her front porch is a recycling yard for, Western computers, having their, the precious metals and anything that's valuable components off of our computer boards being, roasting the boards, pulling them off with tweezers or pliers, and then smashing the components that you see, the little blocks that you see on a computer board, smashing them and then using tweezers and pulling out the precious metals. That's what's going on in the background. And those are all the ones that have been already harvested, and they're just sitting there as waste. So it's kind of, the 21st century meets, ancient China in a way, this kind of collision of these worlds. And kind of, her look, her kind of, it's almost like resignation or I've seen it all, and now we're living. And it was actually one of the most toxic places in the world, because when you bake these boards, the fumes that come off of them were highly carcinogenic. And it's work that nobody else wanted to take anywhere in the world. But there was this a couple of cities in central China, and I, again, through a story, I was photographing recycling in the Toronto area, and I went to Hamilton, which is about an hour away from Toronto, and I saw this massive pile of e-waste, and then I went back a year later to photograph it again with a lift, and it was gone. And I said, "Where did you send it? Like, what happened to it?" And they said, "Oh, we put it in containers and sent it to China." And I said, "Can you tell me where?" And that's how I ended up in this city, as I followed the e-waste to the city in China where it was all being delivered. And then I photographed it there. But it was actually from asking the question, where do all our electronics go to be recycled? I was just asking that question and then allowing research to guide me to this location. So it is it's again going back to how I come to my subject matter. It's sometimes just asking the most fundamental questions. Where do things go to die, or where do we make things, or where do we get the materials to make the things we make? So this was where do things go to die, and that, like the shipbreaking, was where do ships go to be taken apart. This is where do our computers go to be taken apart.
I find this to be a very quietly powerful photograph. So thank you for including this in the exhibition, because as David said, we don't normally think of you with people in photographs. And I particularly like this, seeing this, people in the landscape. Can we share the next image, please?
Mm-hmm. Good. An early one, Ed?
Yeah, so this is really the very beginning of exploring my mining work in 1982. And then there's one thing that David did do that is very unique to this exhibition, is that he went all the way back. And I think I even have some student work in the show. So the idea is that I'm still working with, we're already present in my, in the late 70s and early 80s. And when I decided I was going to do mining, I did go to Sudbury, was the first place. That first picture, Tailings, was 1996. This is 1982. So 14 years later, I went back to do the tailings. But in the 82, 83 period, I went back to Sudbury several times. And this image was kind of an interesting indicator of where I was trying to go, where I was trying to flatten space and trying to create this really all overness in my work too. I wanted that surface to be dynamic. And I was in the work I did earlier with landscape photography and going into the landscape and photographing a high density kind of foliage and like branches and brush, especially in the spring or in the fall when the leaves are down, you can see structure. I was trying to, again, riff off of painting, which was the Abex movement and all overness, think Jackson Pollock or Dubuffet, and then trying to find equivalents in the landscape, trying to fill that frame using the large format camera, almost like thinking of that blank sheet of film as, how does a painter fill that blank? And I was thinking, how do I, as a photographer in a 4x5, because it's a very slow process, and David talked about detail. I was interested in the detail. I was interested in the fineness of things. That I saw photography as the ultimate realist tool. It's like you can go out there and photograph something in the real world and see it in a kind of a hyper sharpness, and we can't see that in reality because the way of our eyes work. And we have periphery of vision, and we have like 8% of the fovea in our eye and our retina is actually hyper detailed, and that's what we read with, and that's what we focus detail on. And then our cones and rods kind of aren't as dense beyond that. But when you look at a photograph, it's almost like that super sharpness is across the whole field. So we experience the world in a very different way. And when you get large prints made with large format negatives, it's a kind of a hyper reality that you kind of in the presence of. So I was, even back in the early 80s, I was already thinking I'm photographing to make these big. I want to have a body experience with the image. And back then, it's interesting, back then a big print was considered a 2024 print. 3040 was considered outrageously large, and now, David, I think we did, 30 by 30 foot. So that's the biggest print I've ever made. So I'll be there in a few days to go see it being installed. But again, that's big.
So I have a question for David, and we can move on to the next slide. Unless you have any comments about this. Yeah. So David, being a writer and curator, I would imagine is a lonely endeavor.
So, writer is a lonely endeavor.
I mean, and also, so I was just wondering if you could talk about your process for curation. And I know each project must be, very unique, and each artist is unique, each photographer. So can you just demystify the process and tell us a little bit about your process in working with Ed and curation in general?
Well, I was aware of Ed's work, and I have a number of his books on the shelf, and I'd seen maybe 3 or 4 exhibitions of his over the years. But it was a chance to go back all the way to the beginning. I was interested in one, Ed's evolution, but also, as we saw from that quarry picture, how the essential sort of DNA or the kind of visual grammar was there quite early for Ed, and it was quite clear that he got a sense of what his goals were in terms of what he wanted to describe in the world, but also what his goals were just as a photographer and as a kind of picture maker. And then once I'd got to know all of the work, it was a question of saying, well, Ed's at this point, he's been doing it for decades. There is a chance to pull together different aspects of the work. But as a curator, I'm always conceiving the shows I do here at the International Centre of Photography for the spaces. So it's not just a question of, oh, well, you have a checklist and then you find a place to put them up. No, you're doing your thinking with the gallery spaces in mind. I mean, I have this feeling that when there's a real kind of synergy between the work and the space that you're in and the way that you're moving through it and the way that you're thinking and your eye is moving around the space, that's when an exhibition really works. And you can only do that by really having the space in mind when you're selecting the work, thinking about what relations between works that you're after or differences between works. When I make books, it's different, but you're thinking about a sequence of images. So for the book of The Great Acceleration, there's a long essay by me at the beginning. It's a chance for me to sort of tell Ed's story, but also sort of unfold my thoughts and place a lot of ideas in front of the reader. And then think about what might make an interesting sequence on the page. And I think a good book is a good book because it's a book. And a show, an exhibition is an exhibition because it's an exhibition and it's not a book. So they might have a relation between them. And in fact, I made the decision quite early on that on one level, the book for this show would be the catalogue. So it has all the works that are in the show and no more. So it's just a very, very kind of tight mapping of it. But you said solitary. I think writing is very solitary, although it is an act of communication. So there's a strange paradox, but it's the same for photographers, where they go wandering out in the world, often feeling very alone. And yet what they're trying to do is communicate, right? So there's always a moment where it goes from solitary to being more social. But I've never got over how, I think the book I did on Ed's work, I think was my 36th or 37th book, and I've never got over the loneliness of writing. I
absolutely love your latest book. I highly recommend anyone who loves to think about each individual image.
Oh, which one's that?
On photographs.
Oh, that's not my latest. There's been 4 since then.
I think it's the latest on your website. So it was.
Could be. Yeah. Oh, yes, it is because it's been.
Okay. Well, I need to get up to speed then, and I will.
Sorry, but it's a very. I don't know. I'd like to hear Ed talk about what is solitary and what is social about photography.
Yes, and I'm very interested in this particular image and your other factory images that I would imagine will be included in this exhibition.
Yeah, well, good news, David. I got a note from Gerhard, so the book is in bindery right now. So.
Oh,
great news!
That was this morning news. So, like a half hour before we got on this call. It's interesting that when I began, it was very solitary. My work in the 80s was very much on my own, and trying to figure things out. And that actually, at one point in 1983, I got a Canada Council grant, and in spring, I took off in spring for 4 months in my car to kind of do all of North America on a road trip to look at mining, rail cuts. And Homesteads was another series that I was doing. And then also I had this other side project when I got to town, so to do taxidermy workshops. I was into taxidermy workshops. In fact, you're showing one of the images from that series in this exhibition, which is great to see, because I actually found that to be an interesting series. But I went for 4 months, and I was just on my own, thinking, and I had actually a journal at that time that I was writing, and really the kind of confidence in building the idea to say, this is a big idea that I can roll out, throughout my career. That I'm not going to use a lot of energy saying, what am I going to photograph? I'm going to use my energy saying, what next in this idea, which is largely, how we as a species are evolving, using materials, where those materials come from, how they're being converted into the things that drive our consumer society, and to be kind of, again, on the road to chronicling the largest examples of the great acceleration, whether it's in China or Bangladesh or India or North America or Europe. I went to wherever it was. So the whole world became my palette for this idea. So, in this picture, we're in China. This is one of two big factory floors. Each one had 500 of these looms, automated looms. These were built in. The machines came from Holland, some of the most advanced machines for making materials for clothing. And I think in this whole factory, there were like 12 workers making sure that everything's running, just walking the aisles. So that's largely just machines working with very, very few people. And then there was like 2 factory floors. So there was like 1,000 of these machines, which I think at the time I asked, like, how much is each machine? That was like $300,000 a machine. So you start looking at the kind of installation and the scale of that. And that was like 23 years ago in China. So it's only gotten bigger. It's nothing, nothing's gotten smaller. It's only gotten bigger. I just photographed BYD, and when I photographed them a year and a half ago, there were 750,000 employees with 75,000 engineers. They just posted that they just added 250,000 more employees in 2024. So they're now almost 1 million employees building electric cars and batteries in China, with a footprint. Their campus footprint for their factories is the size of Manhattan. That's the, so again, we don't, it's on another level. China is still fascinating to me, because, in looking at manufacturing the world and resources and how they're all being concentrated to one central point, China still reigns supreme.
Ed, can we share the next photograph, please? So was there a location, Ed, that just was the absolute most challenging to photograph, and why? And I think your work is so physically taxing, I would imagine in some ways emotionally too. Can you speak a little bit about this photograph, and, what was your most challenging place to photograph?
Well, this photograph isn't obviously it's very high up, so I'm using I think in this case I'm using a helicopter, so this is a First Nations reservation on the left, and then it's the kind of suburbs of Scottsdale, kind of on the right, and so if you look at Scottsdale or Phoenix, they're in the desert. And therefore the grace of the Colorado River and the ability to extract water from the aquifer. It is sort of interesting when you can actually explore this image as a big image, because that's really what following up on what David said is that, when you go into an exhibition, you're actually seeing the work closer to my intention. Everything, the book even, and even on the phone for sure, is a surrogate experience to being in the presence of the print. This is the thing that's made from the master negative or the digital file or whatever. And this is its rendering. And even like, for instance, if you copied this image from the wall off the gallery, and then as best as you can, and then made another print, it would not be as good as that, because you would get losses that happen in the tones and then the detail and all that. So these things are, there's a reason to be in the presence of them. And then when you see this is a big print, you really start to see what I was also trying to talk about, which is, even those little rivers and things that you see on the left, they do kind of reappear in the suburb. They still have these lines that are bisecting the suburb and causing homes to kind of go alongside, because that is a watershed. So right in the middle, you can actually see where the middle point, there's a river, kind of the green, and it carries over into the suburb. But then at the same time, you look at these homes that almost every one has a swimming pool. So you're in the desert with all these evaporating ponds from swimming pools. It's just, like, again, the idea of, living in the desert in a suburb where nature didn't really, intend, for us to live. And we are there for the grace of water, that we know how to control and redirect water into an area that is dry and inhospitable to water, because the First Nations aren't there because there's no water there. You'd have to, there's no river that you can sit alongside. So they haven't built there, but we have. So it is that kind of notion of, what we're doing in the West and what technology, what abilities, which drilling for water, pumping water out, redirecting and filtering the Colorado River. The Colorado River, for instance, they say by the time the water hits Mexico, it's 90% gone, and of that 10% that's left, it's been cycled through 7 times. It's been processed, cleaned, put back in the river 7 times. So what they're getting in Mexico, when it crosses over, the Colorado crosses over, which within a kilometer of its crossing over is a big dam, and all the water is then redirected into agriculture at that point. So to me, when I was doing the water project, I was really trying to visualize and show, again, how modern society, technology, and urban sprawl are all working together to be able to exist in an inhospitable place, because we have managed to harness, all of these, key elements to create a city that can actually be there. Even though, 200 years ago, this would have been impossible. It is through the sheer ability of technology and moving water around that we've been able to kind of have these kind of cities exist.
Yeah. This one, just to say, it is also a really great example. I've actually used it on the cover of the book. But it's a great example of what an aerial photograph can do. That's a situation that's quite difficult to grasp on the ground. But it is so kind of patently clear, but also patently contradictory, and it's full of all kinds of historical tensions, political tensions, economic tensions, ecological tension. They're all there, right? It's not a photograph that necessarily passes judgment. Ed is pretty much in the middle between the two. Doesn't mean he's sitting on any kind of fence, but it's what an aerial shot can do. I love this angle in this one, because it's when you're close up to the print, it's not so far away and so abstract that you can't imagine being in that landscape. you can imagine what it's like walking on the left, and you can imagine what it's like walking on the right, and you can feel all of those differences when you're looking at the print. It's an obvious point to make. I know that we tend to use, there's a kind of strange way that we use the sort of metaphors of, looking down on something in everyday speech. On the one hand, in terms of how it abstracts things, but on the other hand, in terms of how it just clarifies things. If you take a step back or you look at it from above, you can get a kind of quote unquote clearer picture. But of course, the higher you go, the more inhuman it becomes. And I know Ed has some that look straight down on certain landscapes, but these angles and from these kinds of heights, I find really interesting. And I think they're the ones that work best at this kind of 80-inch scale, where you can kind of almost fall into the picture.
Well, we have so many questions and so little time. I'm so interested that you both have cited that Ed's work is more revelatory than accusatory. So in looking at your role, Ed, do you see your role as an artist, an activist, a journalist, or something else entirely? And David, for you, does that even matter? Do labels matter? And what do you see as your role, Ed?
Well, I mean, as a journalist, I think work in a different way, in that I've always been really interested in kind of creating, images that can stand on their own as works, almost like tableaus, or like I'm trying to find the representation of this idea that really brings it home. That I'm trying to kind of take a summary. Like it's I can have the idea. I want to show, urbanism up against nature. Right? Okay, so that's the idea. Where, how, and that's the research. It begins. So I'm not following someone else's requests for an image to describe something. I'm working through, and then once I have the idea, maybe sometimes 2 years, 3 years, 4 years before I'm in front of the thing itself, because I'm researching, I'm thinking, and where is it? How is it? Google Earth has become an incredible tool in my work because of this aerial work. It's been an incredible tool. Before Google Earth, it was really hard. In fact, before it was Google Earth, it was called Keyhole, and I was at TED in 2005, and all of a sudden somebody mentioned that this company Keyhole, the founder of it, was there, and he was just selling it at that time to Google, and it was this kind of whole visualization of the planet. And I grabbed him and sat him down for an hour, and he showed me everything. And I said, "Oh my God, this is a tool that I've been looking for. This is insane what I can do with this." And so it became my go-to tool from that point on. It just really helped my ideas to find the expression where in the world would this be, and so this is definitely a Google Earth find. That I saw it first there, and then I said, okay, now I'm going to rent a helicopter and go there and photograph it. So I think the process and how technology has changed, and then also in 2006, I recognized that shooting with film in a helicopter was very hard, and my misses were so abundant, because it's to frame something like this. It's a hit and miss, because I'm moving at high speeds. I'm never sitting still. So you have to do this. But I still wanted it to feel like I'm shooting with my camera on a tripod with the hood over my head, doing a large format image, but I'm not. I'm now in the air. So then my transition to digital occurred in 2006, because it was a better tool for shooting this type of subject matter. So a lot of things changed, so I can then begin to explore these things from the air. And because I was looking at human impact on the planet, this is before drones or anything, I realized that aerial perspective really drew out these kinds of thoughts and these ideas and really show human scale. And so when I started taking them to mining, I started taking them back to the quarries, which I was doing from the ground in the past. Now I'm coming back with drones and helicopters and airplanes to be able to show it, in from that perspective. And I think that that is a very revealing perspective.
Yeah.
But I am really interested, David, if you think these labels matter. Artists.
The whole question of the label comes up more around photography than anything. The medium, and it's because photographs. Well, one, every photograph is potentially a document and potentially an artwork, right? It's just in the nature of it. It's a picture and it's a description. That's just going to happen. Then there's the very interesting question of photography just naturally sitting at the intersection of many, many different frames of reference. The interesting thing about the people that are interested in Ed's work is that these are many different demographics and many interest groups. It might be people who are very climate focused. It might be photography lovers. It might be art lovers. It might be scientists, right? That's an interesting thing. And Ed doesn't rule that out. It's a very open, generous practice that allows different writers to write about it in different ways, different audiences to experience it in different ways. But it's not as if the audiences have labels. The interesting thing is when you look at photographs like this, that they can be thought of as documents at a particular moment of our world and our uneven economy and all the rest of it. Yes, they have an aesthetic charge to them as well. That doesn't mean there's a kind of aestheticizing of, I don't know, disaster or catastrophe. That's just the way the world looks, and it's a very complicated thing. So, yeah, the question of labels is bound to come up. It's bound to come up, and it always comes up around photography. When the early history of, landscape art photography was put together, it was done by pulling images that were made from kind of land survey projects, that were maybe sponsored by railroad companies. And they got taken out of that context and put into the kind of history of art photography, because these were also amazing landscape photographs. That just comes with the medium, I think. So you can never fully answer the label question, but it's never going to go away either. But I think it's more to do with keeping these things in balance with each other. It's never clear cut. I mean, if Ed stood on top of a chair and just said, "I'm an artist, I'm an artist, I'm an artist," yeah, I'd accept that. I'd also accept that there is a bearing witness to and a documentation of the world in which we live and the state of the planet. Are those two things in tension? Yeah, maybe a little bit, but tensions are very productive things.
Intention.
Yeah, and I would add to it that I've always thought that I share in the world of, in a way, aspects of documentary photography or journalism, in that there is a narrative underneath all of it. But I don't. In a way, I'm working. The way I'm working is not a way a journalists are often. Or in a documentary photographer, I would say the difference there is, if somebody was going to do mining as a documentary project, they'd say, I'm going to go and show the whole process, and this is where they mine it, and this is where they crush it, and this is where they process it, and this is where the waste dumps are, and give you a whole book on the what this particular industry does and front to back. And I had to cover it all in pictures, and there you have a document of how humans make cement or whatever. I'm not as interested in that kind of literal description of it. And then in journalism, it's often you're being asked by an editor or somebody saying, go out there and get me this and get me that. And we're trying to illustrate the picture, this story with an image of let's say a cement factory, and then that's called, that or whatever. So they'll go at it. They got one day, they're on assignment, they go and get it. I'm thinking, how do I tell this story? I'm researching it. I'm spending time. I go back to the subject 2-3 times because it didn't work in this. It didn't work in the summer. I need to be there in the fall. I'm going to go back again. I'm going to shoot it. So to me, I'm constructing images around these ideas, and going back at it time and again. If it doesn't work the first time, I'm light. Everything is at work. The point of view, and so I'm looking at each kind of frame as a kind of considered, evolved kind of way to represent the idea that I'm trying to show, and that each one of them is connected in this 40+ year journey. They're all plugging in to the same idea. So it is one kind of meditation across all these subject matters, but it is largely looking at human impact and how we're transforming the planet. Really, actually, I got an assignment in 1976 when I came to Toronto. It was called Photograph Evidence of Man. So I kind of thought, well, it's like a hall pass. Like I'm an alien. I'm coming here to show another intelligent species what this species is doing to the planet. If I was going to gather a whole bunch of pictures together to take back and say, hey, I'm going to show you what they're doing. This is what they're doing. And this would be a picture showing how we're converting deserts into suburbs. It's a great illustration of that.
I have so many more questions, but in the interest of time, I do have one last one, which is that you've both been interviewed so many times. What is one question that you've never been asked that you would like us to know about your work, or even particularly this exhibition?
Oh, gosh, that's difficult. That's a really difficult question. You're kind of asking what would be the question we'd like to be asked and haven't been asked, or
That's exactly it.
yeah.
I'll take a shot at one, because it's a tough question, but it's something that in my talks here and there, but not really all that I've been touched on. But it's the idea of the technological evolution of photography and the notion of its value. And now we live in a world of the digital camera, and now everybody has a camera. And now anybody who doesn't even have a camera and just has a computer that's connected and can get onto ChatGPT can then prompt images. So, the question of, is what is the value of photography in a world, now, like the cell phones are creating 96% of the images generated in the world today. There's the estimates like over 2 trillion images a year are being made today. When I was photographing with an 8x10 camera, I would think I was probably one of a couple hundred people photographing color negative landscape, maybe I'm one of 10 people. So the scarcity was already built in to the rite of passage to work in that material, and the dedication to the process, and the kind of sacrifices and the cost. I mean, back in the late 80s, making one picture in 1980s dollars, because I would do 2 sides of an 8x10, each side would cost me $30 if I looked at the film, processing, and contact, and I was doing 2 sides to make one. So it's $60 in 1980s dollars to make one picture. Today that would be $200. So, and now just think of it, like to go click $200, one picture. That it says, so there's a kind of almost it separates the work from the world, in a way, because and then people see those 8x10s blown up as a larger print, and they're seeing something very rare. So it's a question, because to me often is there a threat to those practitioners who are still dedicated to the kind of art of photography in a world that is kind of almost overwhelmed by imagery, and now with fake imagery or AI generated imagery. What is the veracity of the image in a world where we're inundated, where there's almost like a tsunami, and on that tsunami is another tsunami. So it is a kind of an interesting time to be in the world of images when people are engaged with them more than ever. But is something happening to the collective consciousness around images and how we interpret them and how they resonate in society, given the ubiquity of it now.
I know I'm very glad that my career has spanned analog to digital. It gives me just a very different perspective when looking at imagery. So, David, I lob that question over to you. If you,
just related to what Ed was saying at the end there, I think people have often think of a curator or the making of an exhibition being some kind of Wizard of Oz activity in which you're sort of not manipulating an audience, but you've got a specific message. And often I don't feel that. My impulse to make an exhibition is one, something slightly selfish. I want to make an exhibition that I really want to see. Curators aren't supposed to talk like that. They're supposed to be kind of professional.
Oh, really? I would think they would, but.
But also, you can have a show that's amazingly well attended and can have great reviews and all the rest of it, but you never actually know what's going on in people's minds when they're going around an exhibition. And you can stop them and ask them and, take surveys or get them to write in a comments book, but that's already changed by that point. So I like to spend time sort of incognito in the shows, just watching people. And I'm really looking forward to doing that with Ed's show. Because you can't know what's going on in people's heads. It's a really interesting, kind of perplexing thing that we can talk about work and we can read about it, and but the actual experience is somehow a little bit beyond all that, and always remains a bit of a mystery. So I'm keen to see how long people spend looking at things. Which pictures do they go back to? Are they talking with each other when they're looking? All of those things. So to come back to the question, that I'm never quite asked in an open way, why do you want to make exhibitions at all? But that would be the answer, because I just in the end I just don't quite know. That's if I knew exactly, there would be no fun or pleasure or nothing to be gained in doing it. So what I'm really looking forward to is the show being up. And a show is not a show until the audience is there to see it and engage with it and become part of it. And then it's a really fascinating, slightly mysterious thing.
Well, I can't wait to see it. So I really thank you both on behalf of the National Arts Club and CCAR for joining us today in this discussion. And again, the exhibit opens the 19th and runs through the 28th. And for details and special lectures, which I'm sure there will be, and happenings, please head to the ICP website, which is icp.org. So thank you, gentlemen, and I will be down there soon.
Great pleasure.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. See you then.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.